Hi, this is Anis from Never Stop Trucking with Sean Matthews from Carrier Defender. As promised, we're going to be doing an interview with him today. What sets him apart from others is that he used to work for TQL. He was a broker, and I'm sure this will be very interesting to the audience. Hey, Sean, how are you?
Hey, Ennis, good to have you. And I'll say I only spent 11 months at TQL. I didn't fit in. I know the reputation they have, but I did get my training and I did get out.
Okay, okay. Well, you are still working with trucking carriers. You're still in transportation industry, so I'm sure that experience has been helpful to you, and I'm sure there will be some topics that we can discuss about brokerage and specifically about TQL and about their practices.
Hey, more than happy to educate folks here. But yeah, real excited, Ennis, and thanks for having me.
Okay, you're welcome. So the first question here that I've been wondering about the interns with TQL and with other large brokerages as well, because it seems to me like they're getting this young blood and just training them the way they want them to be. So, how are the interns trained? Do they know anything about trucking? For example, like hours of service, things like that.
You know, and I can go on to a long conversation about this. I mean, the way that the mega brokers train, and the largest folks, including TQL and a lot of the others, I think Coyote was one before they were bought out. It's going to be a conveyor belt. They take talent freshly graduated from college primarily, no trucking experience, no trucking background, and they just push them through that conveyor belt. And 80% of those kids do not last past 1 year. So they do plan to have this churn. And when you have that much churn, where 4 out of 5 kids quit and they only have 1 out of 5 survive and stay in brokerage, they really do not invest all that much energy. There's in the training, and it's just a business decision. And I know companies like TQL and the other large brokerages, they don't get a whole lot of love from the small carriers out there, maybe in your audience. But the one thing you do need to try to be even-handed in that fact that this formula did work for them, and they are the number 2 brokerage for a reason. They have the most full truckload freight for a reason. So I try to stay even-handed about that. But honestly, that formula for training really hurts a lot of the small carriers out there. Um, so I'll kind of go into detail about the training. So I was one of those kids back in 2019. I was looking for a job and I was looking for a career, mostly to marry my wife because her dad wasn't going to let her marry a guy who didn't have a corporate job. So that's how I ended up in logistics. That's the average freight broker story. I was studying biology in college. I was waiting tables, bartending, and I got a job. The first job I can get a crash course degree in trucking and sales. So I took that TQL opportunity very seriously, and it was me and like 4 other guys, and none of those other guys stayed, and not myself included. Uh, and it's just so much churn because part of the model is, they bring these kids out of college. They probably want these kids. Maybe they have a father, an uncle, a sister, somebody in supply chain that can bring shippers and customers in. Because honestly, who you know is really important in getting customer relationships, and that's one way to do it. And then part of their model is when these kids quit or give up or are fired, they'll push those accounts to a senior TQL rep or a broker, a senior broker. And it's a formula that works. If any of us were in a position like that where we're going to run the biggest brokerage in the country, we would really give some thought into a business model like that works. Because business is business at the end of the day. You're a trucker, you should do that for yourselves, but brokers do the same. And the more you understand how the relationship really is behind the scenes, the better you can run your trucking company. So I always encourage folks to learn both sides of the conversation and stay out of the echo chamber. If the only people you talk to are truck drivers every day who are angry every day about these brokers every day, you're not going to understand enough to maximize your business. So make sure you make at least one friend who's a freight broker who you have a conversation with 30
Yeah.
minutes a week. You teach him about trucking, He'll teach you about brokerage. It's a good relationship. And I'll say one more thing. That's probably the single reason why I was a successful broker. Because at TQL, I didn't get fired. I quit. But I was, my first 11 months in, I was making about $2,000 a week in brokerage margin for my company, which is not bad for some kid who had no idea about this business. But the reason I succeeded is because every chance I had where I gave a load to a trucker, I made him talk to me for 15 minutes. And he taught me about flatbed work. He taught me about why tarpon sucked. He taught me why tarpon 8-foot tall cargo with 8-foot tarps is so much harder than something 4-foot tall. And so I started paying more when I had loads with 8-foot that were 8-foot
Right.
tall that needed tarpon, because those tarps are really heavy and getting on that ladder is really dangerous. And you're going to have a hard time finding a trucker who's willing to do it for cheap. And that's just one example of what I learned as a broker. But that's one thing that really helped me. I made relationships with truckers so they could educate me. Because if you got zero experience coming to college, you better learn quick or you're gone. But again, truckers should do the same with brokers and try to understand what the broker's life is. So, but let me get back to the question here, Ennis. How are the interns trained? The model from back in 2019 and 2020, at least for a mega broker, they and TQL specifically is different than most. TQL will have the interns, but they're called Logistics Account Executives Trainee, LAET. They'll come in and they'll work under a senior broker for 3 to 6 months. And during that time, that kid is learning how to do carrier sales. They're not doing anything with customers or shippers. They're learning how to call truck drivers, and they're learning how to sell cheap loads. And they're learning how to do that 10, 20, 50, 100 times a day. And it's kind of a filter. If a kid lasts 3 to 6 months and they learn how to get good at that, they'll be better positioned to actually sell those services to a shipping company later. But for those 3 to 6 months, they're working under a large broker account. When I was doing it for my first time, I was working under a large refrigerated shipping company, and I was selling cheap loads from New York all the way to California and Bakersfield, and I got really good at it. And the reason I got good at it is because I noticed, there's some things about brokered loads that most truckers don't understand. But a broker load that delivers first thing in the morning is a better load than something delivered late in the evening, because if you deliver in the morning, you can reload with something that day. And I learned, like, you could probably shave 200, 300, $400 off of that shipment when you sell the load. As long as I told these carriers, like, hey, this load's delivered first thing in the morning, you're going to give me a cheaper rate, or I'm going to go find somebody else. Because there's smart trucking companies who get it. And it's fair. It's a fair negotiating strategy. And that's one of the things that made me better than the other folks. But I noticed, because I have these conversations every day, most truckers and most brokers don't realize that there is this point. A load is not the same as another load. There's things that'll make it more valuable or less valuable. Because if you have access to every single load, if you get delivered first thing in the morning and you can access every single other load that day, you're going to make more money than if you delivered at 6 p.m., 5 p.m. that day. You're going to be waiting all night, wasting your day. So those are the things I learned. They use that first 6 months as a kind of a filtering period. The kids who don't survive that definitely would not have survived selling. So, and I'm about the second half of this question here, Ennis, and then I'll let you pop in. Their training's a lot of recorded videos. So they'll have the new brokers just watch a recorded video, which is, technically it's a really cheap way of checking your boxes for training. So every kid there, they'll cover hours of service. They'll average out, drivers make about 550 miles a day on average, which is, I've heard, is pretty low from the trucking market. Because you guys, like, I can do 650 with my drivers, maybe 700. But the TQL folks, when they do their routing, they're planning for 550 miles a day to be safe. But there's a lot of videos back in the day. But really, at the end of the day, the real training is being in a boiler room, hustling and grinding, and surviving. Because it's really hard to survive at TQL. And that way, it's like a big filter where the 5% of people who do survive are actually really good at their jobs from a broker standpoint, and they're really, really good at getting cheap freight moved. So that's my take on TQL. Happy to answer some more
Yeah,
questions, Ennis, if
yeah.
you want a follow-up
So
question.
it looks like they're working with large numbers of interns and potential employees, and just they throw them all in, and then whoever survives, that means that they're going to be really good at it, and then they don't want the rest that's didn't make it anyway. So it makes sense to me. I think that's like the general idea, right?
I mean, I would be careful with the term intern. It's not technically not an intern. An intern's like a 3 months
Okay,
program, but there's no guarantee that
right.
you keep your job. So Echo Global Logistics will have interns. One of my good friends was an intern, but he had to leave and then come back. TQL, the logistics account executive trainee, they're trainees. They can keep their
Okay.
job if they're good. So
Okay.
it's not really an intern. So I want to be careful about that. One thing that I really am careful about is I am very careful with my communications because I do not want someone to come blame me for giving them bad information where they look silly in a conversation.
Of
So
course.
I do
Yeah.
want to be
Okay.
careful with that.
Thanks for pointing that out. Now, what's the general culture? Because I used to work at a couple of large trucking companies. They were not mega carriers, but they were large enough. And then when you work with dispatchers in the office and you have like 7, 8 guys, then there is always this, us versus them, like carrier dispatchers versus brokers. So what's because I've seen some brokers, they have that culture of like, all carriers are just bad. The drivers are bad. They don't listen to directions. They don't follow them, and they have some harsh words for them. Do they teach, like, when they get those people in? And this is not just for TQL. This might be a question for other large brokerages. Do they teach them that, hey, these are the people we work with? If there were no carriers or dispatchers, we would not have a job either. So therefore we should have this mutual respect, be honest towards each other? Or do they teach them something else? I'm just wondering. I get that feeling sometimes
Yeah,
that it's like everyone I talk to, it's kind of like, like it doesn't seem that we are not appreciating each other's.
yeah. I can talk about the culture and I can go deeper because I've seen both sides. I talk to both sides because Carrier Defender, this is my company. I talk to both sides of the conversation, and that's my perspective that I have. The culture at most mega brokerages, at least for TQL, is very much us against them, and the broker against the carriers. And I think there's reasons why that maybe your audience or maybe yourself may have not understood, because I spent a lot of time on social media and I expose myself to a lot of different perspectives, and I realize, you know, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, it's almost like they're individual bubbles of people not being exposed to the other perspective. And one thing that I notice drivers don't realize from the broker's perspective, brokers really are very, very scared of being frauded or double brokered, or getting their cargo stolen, or being tricked. And there's a whole industry on avoiding that. So a lot of the times in the brokerage, inside the brokerage, the conversation is, and this is not just TQL, this is everybody, like, how do we keep the cargo safe? How do we avoid the bad guys? Because I know, Ennis, you've heard about the bad guys out there.
Oh yeah.
They'll hack into a carrier's account on your DAT. They'll impersonate you because your security was bad. Not you, but somebody else. And they'll grab a load from someone else using that DAT account. They'll double broker it to some other innocent carrier, and that load will be taken to a cross dock facility to be reloaded and sold somewhere in Mexico or overseas. And if that ever happens, even to a TQL broker, they're going to lose their customer. And that might be a big customer. That might be their entire livelihood. That might be what they're paying for their kids' college with. And that might be their job if they lose that big customer. They might be fired. Or they might just be fired, period. These brokers are so paranoid of that happening to them. So the culture just evolves to being us against the carriers, us against the bad carriers. They're so paranoid. You're having top management talk to middle management, passing this information on to the kids, and the words devolve into like carriers are bad. brokers are good. We're the good guys. You're the bad guys. And I'm sure carriers have the same thing. Like, us carriers, we're the good guys, and the brokers are the bad guys. But at the end of the day, man, you've really got to strive to meet in the middle. Because at the end of the day, these brokers are people. These carriers, these drivers are people. These dispatchers are people. But right now, what I've noticed, no, there's not enough people meeting in the middle to actually have an intelligent conversation about what's going on. And because of that reason, and I'm going to be pretty frank about this, the freight broker tends to be more educated than the truck driver. No offense. They usually, most of them went to college. They have the ability to write an email, remove emotion from their communications, and communicate an idea a little better than these drivers. And I'm not trying to be offensive here, because I do love these drivers. That's what I built my career, and I worked at a large carrier myself, getting back calls for drivers. But from my educated perspective, because these brokers can email better, have a more intelligent conversation when they communicate. And I heard Marcel's messaging here. I worked at Palletized Truck, and it's a 200 truck heavy haul company in Houston, Texas. I ran their brokerage for a year, and I did their back calls for their drivers. So because of this gap in ability to communicate, ability to write a clean email, a professional email, use professional vocabulary, these brokers, when they communicate all the way up to the top, to FMCSA, to the TIA, like all those organizations who have influence to actually change the rules, they get so much farther than these small trucking companies. And it hurts. It's sad. I don't think it should be like that. But if you analyze the situation and the environment, I really think that's what's happening. I was at Broker Carriers Summit sometime in October, and I gave a presentation, and I talked with these people, and it was a conference for drivers to meet with brokers and talk and exchange notes. But even there, the conversation was primarily being run by former brokers, current brokers, because if you're going to be on stage, you better communicate well, and it's pretty tough. Seeing this and watching this, and I continue to see just angry owner operators, just not understand why the business is leaning so far in the other direction. But I think there's a reason for it, and that's my current opinion on why the culture at most mega brokerages, well, not most. I know Echo Global is a great place. I've got some good friends there, but TQL, it was definitely us against them. And I imagine it might be more now. But also, if you're going to be training an army of kids, and 80% of them are going to be gone next year, you're not really going to invest a whole lot of energy in their training. You're going to take some shortcuts. So how do you get a kid to negotiate aggressively for cheap freight? I think a cheat code is to say, hey, these carriers, they're not your friend, and your job is to make money. And that's a very, very quick way to incentivize a kid to be aggressive and push really hard on these carriers and dispatchers. And guess what? TQL is the best at it. I mean, they have the cheapest freight, right? But I will say one thing. Don't hate on TQL too much. 1% of them, I imagine, maybe more, really, really good people. They understand what you're talking about, what we're talking about, and they're there. But try to look for that 1%. And if someone's negotiating with them, I would suggest, hey, see if it's a kid or not. And if it's not, try to build a relationship, because the senior brokers there have a lot of good work. And if they like you, they can help your company grow. But it's very hard to find them. So, and I'll add one more thing about why the culture might be that way. And it comes back to folks living in a bubble. Even the folks, I think this is a YouTube channel. This YouTube channel is only have the eyeballs from YouTube, which might be 30% of the trucking market. What about the other 70%? They're scattered across Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. I mean, there's other environments for truck drivers where they live, even Telegram, right? And these folks are not on YouTube. YouTube, I imagine maybe your audience is a lot of you Eastern Europeans, probably. So, but there's other trucking communities, and TQL and mega brokers, they see these other folks that maybe you don't have conversations with, and that's Indians, Eastern Europeans, the Mexican drivers. There's a lot of other bubbles that you probably don't interact with that TQL will. And there's some really bad players in those bubbles. And I think one of the common issues I see is kind of the Indian dispatch services. Well, I might not say that. I do I have a lot of business interests, but there's a lot of folks overseas who and they I mean I love Indians. You know, they're some of the best drivers, but there's some dispatch services overseas where their goal is to either double broker, and they don't have, because they're not physically in the United States, there is no incentive to be good. And they're known to take the most shortcuts, because if they get caught, maybe they get fired, they can get another job with somebody else. If you're in the United States and you get caught, you're going to jail. So the incentive is different. So, and if you just map the fact that there is this incentive where those folks are safe to be the bad guys and they tend to be overseas, if you're a broker at a mega brokerage, anybody with an accent is getting lumped into that. And they're probably going to negotiate a little harder if your accent is not American. So I guess the last piece of advice there, if you want a better time negotiating with a freight broker, if y'all can fake a Southern accent on the phone, you're going to make a lot more money. So I have what accent. Look, I'm Korean, but I can be the Korean cowboy. That's a little cheat code I would recommend. It's actually hard to do, but a Southern accent is like the most disarming accent you can get, booking freight or brokering freight. Because honestly, Ennis, if you're booking a load and you run into a Southern broker boy, you'd be like, thank the
Yeah,
Lord.
because
This guy's
they're
the
cutting
deal.
down to trades right away, and they're honest, straight up honest, and like, but they're not gonna
Yeah,
screw you over. Yeah, that's right.
they'll be fair. It's true, and
That's
it goes
right.
both ways. So again, if it's possible, it's not easy. You want to go practice your country girl, country boy accent. Tell some jokes. You'll make
Yeah.
$50 more
I
on
was
those. I
gonna,
promise.
I had some ideas about, because I do a lot of these live dispatching videos, and I was gonna just make it fun and try to do it in different accents just to see the reaction,
You should.
like do it Eastern
Yeah.
European, Southern, maybe Indian, so just to see the
India.
reaction,
That's not
that's
gonna
not
work.
gonna help, right? But speaking about bubbles, you touched so many interesting points there. We could talk for hours. But
Yeah, I
speaking
told you.
about those bubbles, you're exactly right. That's one thing you notice, especially on YouTube, because I'm on YouTube. 99% of the content is on YouTube, but I've noticed it doesn't have to be about trucking. It can be political, anything out there. If you have two sides, and then you go to one channel that's talking, like taking one side of that issue, and you see the audience is like they're clapping them. Yeah, you're right. That's exactly right. And you go to the other side, and they're doing the same thing. So everyone kind of watches what they like, what they want to see, and they're rooting for that person. So that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Now about those new employees at TQL and Culture, the thing is, um, in last few years we have seen this uptick in freight fraud. It didn't used to be like that, like 20, 15 years ago. There was some cargo theft back then and other things, but not as much as now. But even then, I remember there was still this war between brokers and dispatchers. But now, um, like you said, these senior brokers are just so afraid of their freight being stolen or being scammed. They're carrying that over, that paranoia, to these new employees, and they're teaching them that. And these new kids, that's the only thing they know, and they just don't want their freight stolen. And I totally get it. I would do the same thing.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Now, I know we spoke about this earlier. uh, and you said you wouldn't know exactly about why TQL will not work with new carriers, but you can give us some tips about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, I've never had a. I mean, I've booked like 1, 2 lows with TQL. I mean, I'm probably in the same boat as you folks because I booked 50 backhauls with while I was at a trucking company. I did backhaul dispatch for them, and I avoided them. And even I'm a TQLer, right? I know, and I know how they are. Um, but they've got some system. They've got a compliance team that will, I mean, that will protect their company, right? And this compliance team is trained to look for yellow flags and red flags, and they did not train the LAETs, logistics account executives or brokers, how it works. That's in a different department. So the actual broker is separated from carrier approvals, and that's fine. Almost everybody is already set up with TQL. You don't got to train the brokers on how to deal with compliance. And for that reason, a TQL broker will just plug your MC in and see if you're approved or not. And if you're not, they won't know why. They'll say, hey, you need to get set up, or you're not allowed to get set up, and you're gone, or you're not going to work with you. And they don't care why, because half of the country is set up with TQL. They're going to find someone else to take the cheap freight, and it gives them a lot of negotiating power. I assume if you really wanted to fix that problem, if you offered that broker a really cheap rate where he'll make some extra money, he'll probably jump through some hoops for you, get you worked in, which might be a good idea. Like lose 300 bucks on a load, fix your relationship with TQL. That's actually a good deal in my head. Because if you don't know why you're not set up, you're going to have to find an ally to help you get through that problem. And money helps. So if you help a broker make 300 bucks on a load with a cheap rate, he'll go contact his compliance team. Hey, can you get this truck set up? What's wrong with them? They're a great truck. I want to work with them. They're a friend of mine. Whatever they want to say, they're a broker. They control their cargo. They're the boss. And that compliance team will have to look into it with him if he's your champion or she's your champion. So if you really wanted to get fixed whatever problem you have with TQL, that would be one way to go. It would probably work. It would work a lot better with a senior broker at TQL because those folks have a lot of leverage. Or network your way, because, and I'm not off. I don't. There's a lot of reasons TQL might not work with you. Maybe you have some yellow flag. You stole some cargo. You were very, very rude, and you cussed out one of the brokers before. Also, every TQL rep, there's a note system. Every time they have a bad experience with a carrier, they're going to write, I hate this carrier, in the notes. It's going to be internally in the notes. If I know a lot of folks in the audience, they really like the holiday rates. So when TQL called you for a holiday load, 2 days ago on December 31st, was it December 31st?
Yeah, today is the second.
Yeah, yeah. You probably said, hey, give me 20 bucks a mile. Well, if you did that and they said, go screw off, they also typed in the notes, this carrier gives me dumb rates. Because 20 bucks a mile is ridiculous. Even if you're mad at TQL, if you do it, you're going to regret it. You really shouldn't do it. But things like that will show up in the notes. Some angry TQL trainee has enough power to write stuff in the notes. Back in 2019, they did. I think they still do now. So they document internally their experiences working with you. And I know a lot of carriers, they all hate TQL, so they're going to get their emotions out on the phone with a trainee. Guess what? That stuff's going to show up. So that might be the reason why they're not allowed to work
Yeah.
with you. They're going to pull it up, look in the notes. They'll say, Alexis 3 Orbas. I don't know who you are. Shot 20 bucks a mile to John in the San Francisco office. No, they're not. In the Chicago office. I'll never use this guy again. Do not use. And guess what? When you call in on the next load, they're going to read that like, oh, shoot, Alexis 3 Orbas. They're greedy. I don't want to work with a greedy carrier. I'm not going to book my load with them. And you call, you're like, hey, I can't work with you. Bye. Because they've got their phone lighting up with 9 other carriers. They're not going to risk working with somebody who quotes 20 bucks a mile. So the one thing I will say, and that's probably the primary reason I'm thinking through this while I'm answering this question. That's primarily probably the main reason most of your audience doesn't understand why they can't work with TQL. It's probably because they were unprofessional and they have a bad note from some trainee kid who wanted to get back at you for being
Well,
rude to them.
this is more the question that I had was more for brand new carriers, and I understand. Yeah, I
Brand new.
understand. This was helpful as well, but since I work with dispatchers, and a lot of brand new carriers will reach out to me for advice. Uh, the common knowledge right now is that if you start an MC authority, is that most likely only CH Robinson and TQL will work with you, and everyone is prepared for that. But some
Yeah.
carriers will run into this issue where even TQL, for some reason, tells them no. Because we know that they will usually work with brand new carriers, and sometimes they will just say no, and then you call them, you try to reach out several times, they just won't tell you why. And then we found out with a couple of carriers that they messed up something when they were applying for their authority. Something didn't match, like DBA, the address, something didn't match with the FMCSA.
Yeah.
They tried to fix it later, and then I guess it stayed in the TQL's records like that, and now they just won't even touch it. They won't even tell you, hey, no, this is the reason why we won't work with you. And then it's just frustrating for these new people because they put all that money and started working, having in their back mind that TQL is going to be working with them, but now they won't do it, and they won't even say why.
Well, I did go googling while you were asking that question. So TQL uses a system called RMIS. They didn't use it while I was there. They must have added on past few years. So it would be probably really helpful, Ennis, if you did some research on RMIS for your audience. But RMIS is an automatic approval deny system that will approve or deny a carrier setup depending on whatever rules they have set. They're pre-planned rules. I've never used it while I was there. I used it while I was brokering freight at that truck company. It's helpful because it saves time, but without knowing what the rule sets are, you're not going to know. But the good news is RMIS does allow exceptions to be made. Your audience needs to convince a broker to be their champion to get that exception made. Because usually when that one exception is made, you're permanently allowed to move freight. Or at the very least, the broker is going to get the compliance team to say, hey, this is what's wrong with that MC number. This is why we won't work with them. And then you can go fix that. But other than that, I don't know. Maybe you'll have another guest on who can answer that question. Probably not. That's insider information. But RMIS is a very, very popular tool. It's being used by a lot of brokers right now.
Yeah, we love RMIS. It's one of the best softwares out there. It's very easy to work with. So your suggestion would be maybe just try to reach out to RMIS
No,
directly.
no,
No?
no, no, no. I mean, maybe if you get an interview with one of their reps from Truck Stop, that would be doable. Truck Stop, one of the things they love to do is get their brand out. So you might reach out to
Yeah.
Truck Stop and see if you can get a rep to have a conversation. It has to be a friendly interview, but maybe it'll be done. But for your audience, though, if they're having this problem, you know, my best suggestion is you be extra southern with your accent and you tell some jokes and you offer that TQL rep a cheap
Okay.
load, where he makes a little extra money. And then maybe he'll jump through some hoops to get you set up so he can make that
Okay.
extra money. That's probably the best way. I mean, you might still get rejected because maybe you got hacked and RMAS is saying you got hacked 6 months ago
Yeah.
and then no broker will work with you.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a case by case
Sometimes when I
situation.
had some simple problems, I would reach out to RMIS and I would talk, and they were very helpful.
Yeah.
They were
Wow.
helpful. Yeah. I mean, it's like they at least they can point you in the right direction to tell you what the problem is, right? So that's why I was suggesting that. Uh,
Maybe trucks. RMS is a truck stop
right.
product.
Yeah.
So truck stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's go through, if you don't mind, go through comments real quick and try to see if we can. Emerald
Sure.
here is asking: Are TQL employees taught to lie about pickup delivery times, commodity, etc.?
I'm sure someone is. Um, I know. I remember back in my day. They would say first come first serve all the time because if it's first come first serve, you wouldn't be on the hook for any detention fees. Um, and I remember back in my time when I was training, we'd have drivers stuck at pickup or delivery for hours, 4 hours, 5 hours. And TQL doesn't really pay that much. It's like $30 an hour for detention after 3 hours. But sometimes that little bit helps. But I do remember, I'd have guys calling in like, man, I was stuck. Can I get my detention money? Can you update the rate con? And I would look over to my trainer, like, hey, we got Gurpreet Barminder on the phone. He's calling about $60 in detention. And the broker would look at me and say, hey, tell him I'm in a meeting. And that broker was in a meeting for a whole week straight. That was a long ass meeting. Gurpreet Barminder would call in, but you think about it, like, what's he going to do? And I hated it. I really did. I mean, I got in a fight with him about it because it's disingenuous. And that's why I didn't survive very long. I didn't fit in. It's a, it's a, it's a very fratty environment, and I'm not a big guy like that. So, but I did get in a bit of a fight with them about it till I got pulled into the office by the big boss guy, and I got moved to a different team because of it. So, but yeah, it happens, man. I mean, it's not just appointment times, I think is what he said. It's a lot of things. What kind of shortcuts can we make? And you think about it, because I use the detention example a lot. But what's a carrier really going to do over $60 of detention? Because the only thing you can do is get a lawyer. But what's a lawyer going to cost you? $500 to make a detention letter. You're not going to do that. You're going to give up. You're going to give up and send your invoice and get paid no detention because it's just $60. And the brokers know it back in 2019, 2020. And there's no policing of that. So it's kind of like an unwritten rule. So I didn't do it. I only did it for 11 months. So imagine all the customers I could really get. I had good customers who cared about the drivers. I had a lot of first come first serve customers that were actually first come first serve. I didn't get there deep enough to have this problem myself. I don't know what I would have done. I don't think I would have, because when I was in a position, in 2022, I paid a lot of detention. I mean, and I think the real problem of why brokers don't pay attention is because they do not know how to communicate it to the client. They're too scared to call their customer and say, hey, we have to pay this driver extra money. They're too scared because they don't know how to communicate it, that they hide it at the carrier's expense. Because in life, shit always goes down. Shipping, the shipper, the broker, the carrier. The shipper will shit on the broker will pass that shit on to the carrier. Dispatch will pass the shit on to the driver. I think that's how it works. It's kind of like a universal rule. It always goes downhill. And I think what's happening is, the broker just passes it on, and they don't want to make it uncomfortable conversation because they're scared of having that uncomfortable conversation with their customer, because that customer might just fire them for a broker who doesn't hit them with detention. But I made it a real goal of mine. Like, I'm going to communicate this to the shipper because people are people. And I did. I'm like, hey, you got my driver stuck overnight till 11. They kept their mouth shut and they slept in their truck at a refinery. This is 11 hours of detention because that guy was my best driver. And I literally did pay 11 hours of detention for him, because what happens when you have a good relationship with your broker, they take care of you, your team, your unit. This is why I say be professional as a driver, because you'll find these brokers sometimes, like me back in 22, where they will take care of you. I didn't have to pay this driver 11 hours of detention, but I did because I knew he takes care of me. He took care of me for 3 months beforehand. He's going to keep taking care of me in the future. This driver helps me get new customers. This driver makes me look like the best broker in the United States. It was a team, and I would never let my best drivers get stuck with garbage. I'd rather lose a customer over that because I can get to some more. So when I had this uncomfortable conversation with this shipper, this detention situation I had, like, hey, this driver was stuck overnight. We did all our due diligence and I documented everything. Nothing happened. You folks don't work after 5 p.m. It's not really my driver's fault, but we need to make it right. Are you going to approve this detention fee or not? Where I'm really putting the heat on them, and I'm really writing a professional email for my carrier to explain what's going on, to make my customer look like the bad guy. They're kind of pigeonholed, like agreeing with it. So they did. So in that way, I had great relationships. But the problem is with detention specifically, about why brokers lie about paying it, or you might say the appointment thing earlier. Brokers are not trained to have those conversations. They're very uncomfortable conversations to tell your customer things are out of budget now, and communicate in a way where the customer accepts responsibility. That's really hard to do. There's no training for that. To learn how to do that, you have to want to learn how to do that. And brokers are not teaching their new kids to want to learn how to be good humans, because it's easier to just train them on shit rolls downhill. You
Yeah.
just roll it down the hill. And yeah. So that's probably what happens, and I've seen it happen. And it's true, and it's easy. It's a shortcut. Like, yeah, I'm in a meeting for the rest of the week,
This
and you're
this
going to
would
give up.
be a very interesting topic because we could talk for an hour about detention.
I warned you. I warned you, Ennis. I could talk your head off, sir.
But as far as the tension goes, our understanding from the carrier side is that we booked a load with a broker. We signed a rate confirmation. It's a contract, and usually somewhere in the contract or in the rate confirmation, and or we just assume that we're supposed to get paid detention, unless sometimes brokers will specify no detention paid after 4 hours, something like that. But common practice is after 2 hours. Now,
Two, three,
yeah, well,
four, depends.
whatever it is,
Yeah.
two to four. But let's just say a driver got held at this shipper or at this receiver, and then broker is coming back to us. Hey, I'm going to reach out to the customer for detention. Well, our understanding is, hey, we sign a contract with you, not with the shipper, so we are supposed to get paid from the broker for detention. Then they will have to reach out to the customer to get the detention from them, but we shouldn't be held hostage or be forced to wait until that customer pays or doesn't pay for that, because our contract is with the broker. That's our understanding.
The problem is there's no enforcement or regulation, right? So that's what the contract says, but to enforce it, are you going to get a lawyer? Nope. And you got a good mix. Some brokers are good about it, some brokers are bad about it. But the fact is, and I hope no brokers are watching and taking this advice, but to actually enforce that contract in your favor, you're going to have to. There's a lot. I mean, it's
Right,
going to
we
cost,
aware
right?
of that.
And
Yeah.
one thing you can do, you can harass that broker for months, and he'll give up over $60. Like, it's not worth getting a phone call every week for 2 months. But then that's cost more than $60 for you. Why would you do that? It's a bad idea. Um, one thing that I would recommend: don't try to reach out to the carrier team. Most brokers, at least the large ones, have a team that is supposed to care about the carriers, and they will force it. But I mean, at least document your emails to the broker, document your detention. But you need to stay professional throughout the process, because if you get angry about it, you might end up on a blacklist, which is worse than losing $60. So I think if you're in a situation like that, reach the carrier
Okay.
compliance team or the carrier
Okay.
support team. That's what I would say. And I think TQL has been much better at it since I left, I heard. So I don't know, but that's usually the
Okay.
temple
Well,
truth, I guess.
some of this advice can be used with other brokers in general as well. So these are some good things. Let's go through some of these comments, because I promised that we would be taking questions. Uh,
I'll stay a
yeah,
little
so
late,
we
no
can.
problem. Man, you got a
Yeah, we
lot of
can.
fans. Yeah.
We don't have to. We can just do it real quick or in details. I have time. Uh,
I'll keep my
it's
answers
fun.
short now, all right? I
Rocky
promise.
GM is asking: is the risk ratio that high for the freight to be stolen slash scammed?
Yep, yep. Because if a broker posts a load right now, about half the calls are double brokers. Half of them, I'd say. That's from what I remember. It's pretty bad. It's
Wow.
really bad. I mean, not all of them are going to steal the cargo. They're going to double broker to somebody else. It's like a Landstar rep or something from, but half of them, man, it's hard. Let me finish
No, no,
my
it's fine.
answer real quick.
I'm just doing this so I don't
Uh,
forget about this question.
yeah, but I just want your audience to know, like, try to imagine it from the broker's perspective. If you post a good load and half of them are fraudsters, double brokers, and then like 1% of those fraudsters will literally steal your cargo, and you're done. Your career's over. I mean, you're stressed, bro. You hear about these stories in the office. Your coworker down a few desks down, he had a load get stolen, and he's probably gonna get fired. So try to picture that perspective when you're trying to book a load, and why these brokers are a little bit rude. They're still people, and you can be nice to if you can get them to open up, or you tell a joke, or you show them that you understand. You might find a good friend who will pay you extra, who will give you good loads in the future. And if you build your business around doing that, you're going to have some really good broker friends who pay you a lot of money. I mean, there's brokers out there that always pay 10% more, 20% more than the market, because they cannot afford to have bad carriers. And they are glad that they found you, and they will always pay you more. The best brokers I would suggest are the brokers who live in your home base town. Like, I don't know, if you live in Chicago, brokers that are live in Chicago, or brokers who have a lot of freight in Chicago. Because if you make that broker your friend, they will send you Chicago loads with extra money on it every week. And you can grow your company on relationships like that. And that broker is probably pissed off because Chicago is full of fraud. So you got to do a lot of extra work to break the ice with them. But it goes a long way. Sending memes, sending GIFs, telling a joke. Like, it's sad. There's nobody highlights the fact that humor is the best icebreaker. But if you can, you're going to stand out and you'll make more money in
Okay.
2025. So, okay, next question,
Okay,
guys.
that's
I
fine.
guess unless
So yeah, that's true as far as the local brokers go. I mean, I'm actually in Grand Rapids, Michigan, West Michigan, and there's like
yeah,
7, 8 local brokers that we love working with. So that's a good
yeah.
point. Rocky GM is asking, can you ask him what he thinks about broker transparency? I love your response, but I would love to hear a broker's point of view too, because there is this. Right now, everyone is talking about this new bill that might go into law, and it has been. Uh, People just assumed that brokers are supposed to only make up to 15% from the load rate, and that they were supposed to give us that rate if we were to ask. So that's a lot of gray area, and to me, my view, I don't know if that's going to change anything. But what do you think about that? About the transparency?
I've actually talked with the people running that conversation at the top. I mean, it's all over the place, broker transparency, and I actually am connected with the folks who are having this conversation all the way at the top. My personal opinion is, whatever happens, the market's just going to pivot, and it's not really going to have a much impact on everybody. Um, I've actually talked with Ken Adamo. He's the DAT data guy. He's the chief data guy at DAT, and I mean, the feedback I've heard is the law was created quite a while ago. You have to be a historian to understand it. But I've seen some commentary from Matthew Leffler. He's kind of the armchair attorney. I don't know if you folks in the audience have heard about him. He's a very, very educated guy, one of the best communicators in the trucking industry. And I learned a lot from watching him, listening to him talk about it, and he's written about it. But the law back in the day was designed to protect brokers, I believe, because back in the day, the truckers had way more leverage than the freight broker, and the freight broker had no way of making sure that they got their money's worth. Yeah, I would really refer any opinions to those experts like Matthew Leffler, because he spends a lot more time researching it than me, and he's been in the industry longer than me. I've got 6 years. I ain't no slouch, and I can be dangerous if I need to. But again, I know what I don't know, right? And this is not something I even say that I'm an expert on. But one thing that I would believe is also Ken Adamo. He has he runs all the data for DAT, and they have the best data for vans and reefers. So, but I believe whatever happens, it's not really going to
Yeah.
change much because everything's going to pivot, everything will adjust, it will be right back where we started. So I'm very very neutral about it, and I really don't really care too much. I think I think what might happen, or it might be a slight net positive for the carriers out there, is brokers would no longer be able to make large margins. And those brokers who overquote will pass more of that money on to the carrier if they quoted too high, because if they got caught making that much money, they would lose their customer very quickly. So, with that said, I think it might be like a 0.5% improvement for the carriers, not much, because brokers will not keep that money to themselves anymore. They will pass it on so they don't get caught, even the bad ones, because there are brokers making a lot of money. Back in the day, during my TQL days, I had a great customer I did a lot of work for up in Washington. We had an 8-stop delivery throughout Canada. It was a lot of work on me, but every once a month I got that load. I did quote it very high, and I made about $1,000. Sometimes I made $2,000 on one truckload, but it was a lot of work for me, and I didn't get that every day. Most of my, I mean, I didn't. That was a very, very once a month type of thing, where I had to provide a lot of additional value to that client. But in that situation, if transparency was a thing, I probably reduced my margin to maybe 700 or 500, because what happens with broker transparency, I think, if a carrier has that rate data, it's almost like an information hazard, right? I mean, what can you do with that information? What would happen if someone else had that information? You don't know. But if the shipper found out, it's not going to be good for that broker, or they're going to have a really good explanation, or they're really going to have proven I am providing enough value to get paid $2,000, which some brokers are providing that value, by the way. So it's a hit and miss. But overall, there'd be more money funneled to the carrier. You might see, oh shoot, I misquoted this. I need to pay you more so I don't look bad, kind of thing. That's what I think is going to happen. But again, I think it got delayed for 12 months, right? They pushed it back. So the conversation is going to be lasting a lot longer. But again, if anyone's interested, I recommend you do look up the armchair attorney, Matthew Leffler. He has a very educated opinion, and he's one of the best communicators in the
Okay.
industry.
Actually spoke. I didn't spoke to him directly, but I messaged him the other day, so we might
Oh,
have
wow.
him here as well. Uh,
Good guy. I met
okay,
him
cool.
once.
So my next question was going to be about the rates. How does TQL determine the rates? And then you started talking about the rates and the cuts. So I could maybe reformulate that question a little bit to add this question as well. Are the shippers actually aware of how much the broker is making, and do they really care? They don't
They
care
don't
about
care.
that.
Why would they? Brokers do a service that a trucking company cannot. And freight brokers can regularly outcompete a trucking company. I've been that freight broker. I provided a service that was better than a trucking company could, even a local trucking company. It's a thing, and it's. I've never heard anyone say the same thing, but I've got this feedback directly from my clients. If a freight broker is doing everything right, they're going to outperform a trucking company on price, on service levels, on exception handling. And it's a tough pill to swallow, and I don't think any trucking company will ever see this like I have working inside of a trucking company. And again, I'm going off subject here, but I'll try to keep it very very quick. A freight broker is going to be able to solve emergencies faster than any trucking company. If a shipping company has a breakdown and like, man, I got 2 hours, I got to get this picked up. Heck no, none of the carriers out there are going to be able to have that. You don't keep trucks waiting on standby for 2 hour pickup notice. That'd be stupid. You go out of business. A broker can find somebody in 2 hours, and I've had cargo picked up in 3 hours flat. there was a truck there getting loaded. A carrier cannot do that. A trucking company cannot do that. If you did do that, you go out of business. What you could do is you could add brokerage to your trucking company, but nobody wants to do that for some reason. It's plug and play. It's free. I don't know why more people don't do it. I wish they would, because then that carrier would be better than a broker. You'd be an asset company with a brokerage attached. You could add agency to it. The other thing that a broker does that carriers cannot, we always source backhauls, backhaul trucks. It's always backhauls. It's always a trucker that made a lot of money going in and they need to get back home. Those trucks are the cheapest trucks you'll get. Even if I add my margin on it, it's going to be cheaper than a carrier. I mean, we only do backhauls. We only get backhaul trucks, backhaul capacity. So if a cargo is going farther than 300 miles, definitely farther than 500 miles, a broker is going to be cheaper than a trucking company 95% of the time, even if we have margin on top. And I've noticed this, just if you get a quote from the wrong truck who doesn't like the lane or doesn't want to go there, they're going to cost too much money, or they're going to have more deadhead. So those are two things that brokers do that you got to keep in mind. I mean, there's value that brokers provide in the market that is not you can't provide as a trucking company. So it's when everyone says like, hey, just replace the broker. Brokers don't need to exist. Brokers are stupid. We don't need brokers at all. I always know that person doesn't get it. And I'm almost these days it's almost as if a lot of times the broker serves as your sales rep. They're taking a 10, 15, 20% margin because they are your salesperson. And it's better to have a good relationship with a salesperson or have a loyal salesperson. But I just want to be careful about that. And Ennis, I think I went off track. Sorry.
No,
Let me
it's
rephrase
fine.
the question one more
My
time.
question was about the rates. How do you actually determine
Yeah.
how, based on what do you quote the customer for
Yeah.
certain lane?
So TQL is different. TQL is the best, in my opinion. TQL has the cheapest rates because they do the backhauls the best. And it's hard to say. I mean, for any boring standard flatbed dry van reefer, TQL is going to have the cheapest rates. From what I saw, and are you familiar with DAT Rate
Yes.
View, Ennis? So DAT Rate View has a spread where they'll have like a margin of error and an average. When I was at TQL always got the bottom 25%.
And we
When
look
they
at the
booked loads.
top one as carriers.
Yeah, see that
Yeah.
difference? It's true. And it's because they just could. They had a reputation for being cheap. Nobody calls TQL unless you're ready to be cheap. And they had access to a lot of the Indian drivers, a lot of the Mexican drivers, a lot of the cheapest drivers. And they had the data to filter the cheap drivers on who was the good cheap driver and who was the bad cheap driver. And they use this to deliver value to their customers. Also, TQL is really gunning for $200 margin, $300 margin, $400 margin, maybe $150 margin, flat margins. The other brokers out there are going for 10%, 15%, 20% margins. There's a difference. If you got a load from New York City to California, that's like an $8,000 load maybe. TQL is like, fine, I'm fine with $500. Another broker who needs 10%, they need $800. They need $1,000 on that load for their margin because they're gunning their performance metrics are focused on percentages. I noticed that. And that's why I noticed, it's really tough to compete with TQL because TQL is just structured to be a far more aggressive freight brokerage than the other folks. And that's all the way at the top management. So, and I'll say one more thing. The TQL reps, they quote whatever they want. Nobody bosses them around. Every single rep, if you're a logistics account executive, if you're brand new 1 year in, or if you're a senior, you put your own prices on whatever you want. Nobody tells you what to do. They can quote low, they can quote high. And they're going to use DAT data. They're going to also use internal company data because TQL has the best data internally out of anybody because they have the most full truck loads. But yeah, generally, they're planning to pay someone the least, and they're adding some money on top. And whenever they send that quote on to the client, it's usually going to be the cheapest quote. And it's some of the it's I think they're the best cheap freight brokerage solution a trucking company can get. And you gotta plan around that. So that's what I'll say. I've done, yeah. So I hope that answered the question on how TQL quotes their loads. But if you're gonna work with TQL, you better plan that they did quote it lower because they can. I'm looking at the names in this chat right now. I got Rocky, Alexis, Sir. I don't really see a whole lot of Gurpreets, Barminders, Sunnies. You got to bear in mind that TQL is using that kind of
Yeah.
capacity, which is typically
Now, a
cheaper.
lot of my audience is from India and Pakistan. They just use American
Okay.
names.
Oh,
Amir,
okay. My bad. My wife's
I
Indian, by the way, so
I
I'm
know
honorary.
most of these
Yeah. So
people, they come here a lot. They always follow these streams.
yeah.
Amir B, he owns a very large company here in Grand Rapids. He's a friend of mine. I know him personally. They do auto parts. They're very professional, so he always turns in.
Oh,
But no, based on your answer, what I got from that answer, it did answer the question. So what I'm thinking is that TQL, when quoting their customers, they will look at the lowest rates on DAT, and they will look into their database. Based on that, they will quote the customer, and they will add whatever their margin is 150, 150, 200, $300 that they
whatever they
want to
want.
make on that load. So I'm thinking if we were to do a long haul, it would work better because when I think about it, we do a lot of short loads. TQL, we never book any short loads with TQL, probably because of that, because they're trying to make $150 on a 100-mile trip, right? As opposed to a carrier who wants to make 10, 15%, because that way, that carrier that does that short load, if you understand what I'm saying, yeah.
That's true.
So
Yeah, I agree.
TQL would
Yeah,
not be the broker to go to for shorter loads, right?
yeah. You're right. I thought about that. You're right, and it's true. I mean, the best solution for short loads is a local trucking company. Um, Now they'll still need a broker for emergencies, but you're right. Look, TQL is not going to be that
Yeah,
local company
yeah,
at all.
yeah. Okay. Um, how effective is their cold calling? I don't know if you should. I'm not. I maybe
The most effective in the
maybe cold
industry.
calling is not right, but I get so
Yeah,
my cell phone is registered with FMCSA, right? We have three other phone numbers here for the office, but when I first started this company, I registered my cell phone. Now I'm too afraid to change it, honestly, because we recently changed our address, and some brokers would tell us, hey, we can't work with you. That's a red flag. You dared to change your address, you dared to move, right? Now I'm too
yeah,
scared to change my phone number. But
that's
but
true.
TQL calls me on my cell phone all day long. So we would
Yep,
post a truck somewhere. We would do a load with TQL, and they know we are in that area, and they would offer us a load that doesn't make any sense. I would post a truck from Michigan to Texas. They would offer me a load to California, right? And it's just annoying. And everyone, like, how does
yeah.
that even work for them?
It's very ineffective. I think it's a three birds, one stone thing. One, there's a very small chance they might find a carrier who's flexible on destination, like 5% chance. Two, they're confirming that the market is dead for that lane. And if they make 100 calls and they can't find a truck, nobody's going to find a truck. And then they can go to the client saying, hey, there are no trucks in the area. We need more money. And we've tested it and proven it. I mean, you make 100 stupid calls to every truck in an area, you're gonna know nobody. I mean, if that customer calls their other broker, that other broker is going to say the same damn thing. Nobody. You can't do magic. So that's another value point. And then three, you're training the kids to make 100 calls that suck and stupid calls. And if they can do it with trucking companies like this while they're training, they sure as shit can do it to shipping companies once they're done training to sell the shippers this service. So I think it's a three birds, one stone thing. But yeah, I mean, I think I found a truck once like that and I got them booked on a load that was horrible. But you gotta think outside the box. TQL's not a dumb company. They don't do dumb things. There's always a reason. But they're filtering their candidates. If you can't make 100 dumb calls now with trucks, you're not going to do it with shippers, and we're going to fire you
Mm.
quick.
Well,
So it's
it's not
smart.
just the phone calls. It's also the way they post their rates. They're known for that. They're infamous for that. And I see, like today, I tried calling Scotland, the brokerage, and this is the way I say it. I said they went TQL on me because they post uh like the guys in Fort Wayne. There's a load Fort Wayne to Erie, Pennsylvania. I call them. They're saying, "Hey, this is picking up in Gas City, Indiana, going to Dunkirk, New York." And both of the, like, even the pickup and delivery, they're different. And I tell him, like, why are you posting like that? And then he started fighting with me. So TQL does that a lot, and it's just, yeah,
I've done it. I've been guilty of it. I did it in a better way. Sometimes we've got a load in the worst city ever, some random place in North Dakota, and nobody is looking on the load boards there. There are 0 eyeballs. Going to Florida or something stupid. But I have a lot of money in the load, and it is a good load. And the only thing I'm missing is a phone call. In a situation like that, I will post that load in a bigger city, far away. I mean, I think I've done it from 300 miles away, which is the worst in your head. But I was prepared to buy them the deadhead. I was going to pay for every mile of deadhead, and it was going to be the best load they got that day. So in a situation like that, I understand what the broker is doing. It's like it's marketing and making noise, and I've done it. And the carrier was very, very happy. It was a heavy haul load. Customer was dying. It was a blank check. Yeah, they're like, holy crap, that's a lot of money. And they loved it. So in a situation like that, I think it's fair that a broker posts a load like that. But I also understand 99% of the time, they're just being silly with no money on the loads, and they're just posting in dumb locations. Uh, but that's my perspective. I don't know if you folks will agree with it. Um, it's pretty bad if they don't have the deadhead
yeah.
money in it.
Well,
That's what I
that
want to say to that.
example that you just gave us makes sense, but like the one
Yeah.
like today, like Fort Wayne, and there are a lot of cities out there, but TQL does this a lot. And if they tell me right away, hey, this is actually picking up out of there, not from here, but then a lot of times they would say, well, that one has been covered, but I have this one.
Ooh.
So you're starting this relationship with a lie, and I just don't want to do it that way, right? I don't feel comfortable working with you because down the road there's going to be something else they're going to be lying
Yeah.
to me about. So that,
There's that culture at some
yeah,
brokerages. Shortcuts. It worked one
yeah,
time, so they do it again. And there's no way to police it.
yeah,
So it
yeah.
happens. I'm sorry, man.
No, I'm just trying to get behind that philosophy, that mindset. Like, what's like, does that even work for them? That it
It
works.
works.
Okay.
There's some drivers are brand new, don't know any better. This is the first time they heard that script, so they'll believe
Oh
it.
yeah, there you go. So I
Yeah.
wanted to ask you one more thing. We've been streaming for 1 hour, but I wanted to ask you about Carrier Defender. Before that, I just wanted to go back to one of the answers that you told us about freight.
TQL's not sharks, guys. TQL's a 5 out of 10. There's a lot worse. I promise you that. There's some better ones
No, I
too.
made a video a long time ago about TQL, and I still have the same. We will book loads with TQL. I don't have a problem with that. Um, I'm
Yeah.
not saying TQL is bad at all. They do have a lot of good things. Uh, no,
I
no,
was reading the
I see
comment
that
there. My
comment
bad.
as well. They have a lot of good things, right? They're not my favorite broker, but it's not like I absolutely, hate them. No, not even close.
Yeah.
We will work with them. They have a lot of good things um, about them. So I wanted just to mention something about the freight fraud and the stolen freight that you were mentioning before. Like some guy had freight stolen, and then he got in trouble, and everyone else is freaking. We actually have something similar as carriers. we are always on the lookout for a driver who might abandon the truck 1,000 miles away from here, abandon the freight, not even tell you where it is, do something like that, not pick up their the phones. And then it's not just the freight, it's actually the truck, because you got to go and recover that truck and try to find it wherever it is. So we're always on the lookout for that as well. I just wanted to mention that. So we have similar problems. Uh, so
All
Carrier
right.
Defender, what is that? Maybe we can talk about that some other time in more details. But if you want to tell us about Carrier
Yeah.
Defender, what you guys do?
Yeah. So I'll give you a quick elevator pitch. When I was broking at a trucking company, uh, I used Carrier 411, and I noticed some of my best carriers got a freight guard or a bad review that was inaccurate or false. Sometimes they were hacked, and I found out there's nothing they can do, and they lost all the access to cargo. They couldn't grow anymore, and it was just the most ridiculous situation where you know I'm a freight broker at a trucking company, and I can see both sides. That for $99 a month, a freight broker can buy the power to nuke an MC number out of business 2020 in 2024, and to do an accurate defense, a realistic defense to protect your company from bankruptcy, you have to spend $10,000 to hire an attorney. It's a very, very unbalanced situation right now. And I sat on that idea for about a year until I met this guy has a podcast named Alex Bates, and he seemed to agree with me. And him and I got together, and we wanted to put together a solution that helps these truck drivers protect themselves without having to go all the way to court, because $10,000 is a lot of money. So we put this company together, and one of the things we got is we actually have an attorney on our team. He's actually out of there in Michigan, Ennis. I don't know if I mentioned that. And we're offering informal routes to get inaccurate reviews removed. And I think everybody in your audience knows the companies I'm talking about. And it looks like there's been a lot of traction because this pain point's been there for a long time. So, we're just here to help protect small trucking companies who cannot hire an attorney to stay in business when they run into these unethical freight brokers or these emotional freight brokers. And I call them, they might be a baby running around with a nuke, because sometimes it's this guy 30 days into his job at this tiny brokerage with a login to a carrier identity platform, and they just you said something wrong to them someday, and they wrote something real bad about you in return. And if they say you're a double broker, you stole the cargo, you renegotiated, or if you're a fraudster, they can say whatever the heck they want. There is no dispute process. You're not going to get you're going to lose 30% of the spot loads overnight. So we put something together to fix that. Happy to jump on another call, and it's sometime in the future,
Hmm.
maybe in March, and talk more about your audience. But you can look us up at carrierdefender.com. We if you put us on YouTube, you might run into us. We're also we so yeah. Other than that, that's
So
who
in
we are, Ennis.
short, if you get a freight guard report, you guys can help carriers.
We can look at it. If it's your fault, if you did something wrong, there's some limited mediation things you can do. But if it's completely inaccurate or
Okay.
false, we can help you. And from what I've seen, about 5% of them are like that. Some real bad brokers out there are going way overboard on
Okay.
these reviews.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here. This was very educational. Even for me, I learned a lot of new things. You clarified some things for us, and I think the stream has been very um well. We've had 50, 60, 70 people at the same time watching this whole time. So I think this is a really good success. And then I will leave this stream this live stream on the channel, because you guys were asking, and I always leave them there, so you can even watch them or share them with others. Thanks, Sean. It was very, very nice talking to you. Thank you very much for being here. This was great.
Ennis, thanks for having me, sir. Hopefully we do another one sometime in the future. Other than that, glad to provide